For me, it was kind of the opposite. I kind of went into the field of psychology trying to figure out, hey, what's wrong with me?
Okay.
And I was like, you know what? Maybe if I just do my undergrad in psychology, I can figure it out. And through that process, I kind of discovered there's nothing wrong with me. It's actually just that I am a person responding to what I've been through. And I think that's true for everyone. I mean, we're all products of what we've been through.
Thank you for tuning in to the Rescue Mission podcast. This is Jay, and today I've got Blake and Matt with me. And we are hosting today Wanda from the Karis House, which is also a part of the Rescue Mission. We like to call it the Rescue Mission's Karis House. As we're in Mental Health Awareness Month, the month of May, I thought it would be good to talk about the importance of counseling. And Wanda, you've got a little bit of experience of counseling. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Good. Tell us a little bit about your background with counseling.
Definitely my main thing is that with counseling, I've experienced it both on both ends as the client and also now as the clinician and actually providing counseling to others. So it's been a very rewarding experience, really helping others through their trauma, their grief. And also for me, it's been a very healing process on the personal end as a client, just being able to actually overcome my own trauma and things of that nature. So,
What inspired you to step into that?
well, that's kind of, a lot of people will kind of start with like, oh, I always wanted to be a counselor or just like helping others. For me, it was kind of the opposite. I kind of went into the field of psychology trying to figure out, hey, what's wrong with me?
Okay.
And I was like, you know what? Maybe if I just do my undergrad in psychology, I can figure it out. And through that process, I kind of discovered there's nothing wrong with me. It's actually just that I am a person responding to what I've been through. And I think that's true for everyone. I mean, we're all products of what we've been through. Our experiences in childhood and everything leaves an imprint on us. And sometimes that imprint can express itself in different ways, such as anxiety, depression, and we may need a little bit of help dealing with that.
That's a really incredible way of thinking about that. You know, what's wrong with me versus I'm a person that has had experiences in my life. I'm just kind of blown away by that straight out of the gates. I'm the type of person that likes to take something and chew on it. And it's like, no, you can't do that right now because we're in the middle of recording a podcast.
We're 2 minutes in, Jay.
We're 2 minutes in, and my mind is already blown.
The deep end of the pool, right?
How do you think you came up with that? What drove you to that realization?
It was, in fact, I actually remember the moment. I was in my psychotherapy course looking at schizophrenia and some of the other stuff, the different diagnoses and the DSM-5 and all of that. And I realized, like, wait a minute, if you really just look at it at the core, this individual is just responding to what they've been through. Of course, in some cases, there is factors like chemical imbalances and things of that nature. But again, that's a person experiencing what they're, being exposed to at that time. And sometimes our environment can cause some of those imbalances. So it just really was just a moment where I realized, like, hey, it just kind of made me more comfortable with my mental health and where I was in my journey, just by realizing, hey, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just a person responding to what I've been through.
Do you think that was based off of the stigmas that a lot of counseling gets, in the sense of people, especially in America, seem to view counseling as, oh, you shouldn't need that, or only people that are, really bad off get counseling? And that stigma, I think, is kind of throughout society. So I think we all have these perceptions of it, even if we've had nothing to do with it.
And as much as everybody says that, and as much as everybody talks about that, it's still like everybody says, eliminate stigma, but it's still a huge part of this whole thing.
Oh, yeah, it's huge, and especially with different cultures and different groups. I happen to be African American, and in the African American community, not only is mental health frowned upon, sometimes even getting basic, regular physical health is something that is delayed, and that we just don't put enough emphasis on the factor that we have to take care of ourselves in order to take care of others.
So when did your focus kind of shift? Because you said you went into it trying to figure out what was wrong with you. When did your focus shift from you as a person to shifting to wanting to start caring and pointing towards other people?
It was when I came to the rescue mission.
Okay.
Within my first year here, my supervisor and we just kind of spent some time really just reflecting on a lot of the individuals that were coming through our doors. At that time, I was the admissions coordinator, and I realized that I was spending a lot more time in a therapeutic way with those individuals because I was the first point of contact and they were in crisis. So how do I lower your distress just to get you through the intake process? So at that point was when I realized that it could be very beneficial to have more of a therapeutic role in the work that I do here at the mission. And also with our, now after a couple years of kind of spending some time in the therapeutic role, realizing that there's gaps in the system sometimes where an individual may be in crisis but have to wait for a regular provider. Mm-hmm. And by having that therapeutic presence on staff, I'm able to help fill those gaps and voids a little bit. So that way the individual can actually receive care in a more urgent manner and also benefit from the programs that we're offering them.
What are some of the things that people are coming to you about? You know, you said you're doing these intakes with people and they're bringing the issues. What are some of the common things that people are bringing into these meetings?
It's a wide range of things.
Okay.
Like I'll kind of start off with one is that a lot of childhood trauma that may have led to a life of addiction, or either domestic violence or abuse or trauma through other ways, such as there's quite a few military members who are here who may have been exposed to combat and traumatic experiences that way, which it kind of all starts a snowball effect in a way that first the trauma hits, and then because they're not maybe seeking counseling first in the mainstream mental health services, they're self-medicating and self-treating. And that's when we see the abuse of alcohol and other substances come into play because they're really just trying to control and reduce what they're going through psychologically. And then we see homelessness kind of spiral into that, and then they're here at the mission.
Speaking of military, I think there's a misconception about PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what it is? Because people that haven't served can have PTSD, and I always love a clarification for people to understand. If someone says I have PTSD, they're like, there's no way you have that. And it's, let's talk through this. Can you explain that?
Absolutely, because on that end, with me also being a veteran, when a lot of individuals like, oh, well, of course you have issues. It was from when you were in the military. And I was like, oh, yeah, I know I joined after 9/11, but I had a cush office job and, you know, I never saw combat. So and I have to let them know, like, I actually had a diagnosis of PTSD from my childhood. I was traumatized and went through quite a bit of trauma in my youth before ever joining the military. And that is what I was working through. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is really just, it can be stem from any type of trauma that a person has been through. Like maybe you've had to witness a very tragic death. Our medical personnel, especially during COVID, had to see a lot of traumatic things, and as far as death and dying and just a lot. So our firefighters, you know, have to think about them with going into burning buildings, and maybe the outcomes haven't been that great. Or even someone in a more mild case could, you know, maybe they were in a car accident. Yes, they walked away from it, but everyone experiences trauma differently. So that's the key thing whenever we think about post-traumatic stress disorder, that what may be traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you. And we have to be respectful of the individual and how they view trauma in their life.
So if somebody realizes that they've experienced some trauma that's impacted them in a way that maybe they wouldn't have known about before, but maybe they're starting to reflect and realize, you know, I experienced this a few months ago. Because I've heard that sometimes you can't even tell that it's affected you until it's been like 3 or 4 months, is what I heard from somebody. So if somebody's found themselves in that situation, what are some of the steps that you would want to take towards like addressing that trauma? Like, what do you do?
Well, the main course of action, the best one would definitely be seek professional care. Like, starting off with a therapist, a counselor would be really great. If you're not able to do that, maybe even, spending time with your pastor. A lot of pastors at churches do offer some level of therapeutic care as well. But definitely just start that process of figuring out how it's affecting you and working with someone who can help you address those different areas. Some individuals, it may even need a bit of a medication approach. Like with myself, insomnia was a big piece of mine. So even though I was in counseling, that wasn't enough. I had to actually go to a psychiatrist and be prescribed medication to help me sleep at night. And then eventually I was able to move past all of those things with the combination of both. Just understanding that mental health services and the care that you receive is more of a vessel to get from point A to point B, to get from where you are with your crisis to a state of well-being.
Yeah. We were talking about stigma. There's a lot of stigma around medication, especially with Christians. And medication, a little bit from my story, and I'm pretty open about my story, but I've been diagnosed with severe major depressive disorder. And when I first got diagnosed, they prescribed medication. And as a Christian, I'm like, man, depression is supposed to be something that I can pray my way out of. That's kind of the understanding that we have about it. Like I'm just really, really sad and I should be able to get out of this. And it wasn't until actually a close family member told me that at one point in time they took antidepressants and it helped them navigate through that. Why do you think it is that there's such a stigma around taking medication when we take medication for a gazillion other things?
Exactly. And a lot of times that's what I will utilize with an individual. Like, okay, well, if you have a headache, what is going to be your course of action? And they'll say, oh, I'll take a Tylenol. Well, the Lord helped us develop the tools to discover how to make Tylenol and aspirin. So that way we have a way of treating those things. So what's that? And then having to compare that to other medications for depression, anxiety, insomnia, that like, again, this is where the Lord has helped equip us with the knowledge and to know how to be able to understand these fields of science that our brains and how the chemical imbalances and all of those things work together. And so we are still trusting in the Lord.
Do you think a part of the stigma is related to addiction, where I would say in the early 2000s, the whole prescription drug, morphine, all of that became such a huge problem in society that I think medication as a whole was kind of frowned upon, especially hard meds.
Well, and even before that, once you started getting the ADD, ADHD diagnoses, and you started talking about Prozac, and you started talking about Ritalin and Adderall and those types of things. It's not just on the abuse. I want to numb myself. It's what at the college level, right? The numbers of students using Adderall to get their work done, is crazy. So you're not just dealing with like, I'm sad or I have PTSD. You're dealing with, I need to keep up. I need to get more done than I'm getting done type of stuff.
Yeah, and especially looking at it from a historical perspective, when they were first creating medications for mental health and disorders, there was always, well, like, for instance, some people say, oh, you're going to get Thorazine, and then you're just going to be kind of a zombie. And there was that perception that, okay, if you're going to be on mental health meds, it's going to completely alter your mind, because a lot of the medications initially at the beginning did have a very strong impact on the individual's mood and affect. So we did see some differences there, but the medications have come such a long way, and it's night and day difference. And most prescribers start off very low dosages. So the goal is that we can add more if need be. We're not going to start off at the max level whenever you go in to see a prescriber. They're going to start off with the lowest dose possible, because the goal is that the least restrictive care approach. So that way, again, the future is that you're not going to be here your whole life on needing this item. It's just a vessel to help you get from point A to point B.
Yeah. Can I tie this maybe a little bit back to what we deal with here in terms of First of all, I'm realizing that we're going to need about 6 or 7 more episodes with you. And the other thing is just dealing with which demographic are we talking about? Which group of people are we talking about? Because we've touched on a whole mess of different things. We've talked about the community that we serve, but we've also talked about the people who serve under our roof, and the people who are employed here, and people who are affected, by those people. I remember very early on in my marriage, my wife was a trauma nurse, and thinking, you need mandatory counseling like once a month. Like everybody on your unit needs mandatory counseling once a month. And obviously that doesn't happen, right? But I guess what I'm sort of pushing towards is, first, what are the barriers to these different communities to get, and in that question, you were talking before about, doing a lot of this therapeutic stuff during like an intake or something.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the counseling that you do is formal, like we're going to sit down and talk about this from this time to this time, versus see you in the hall,
I definitely would say a lot of my work happens in the informal setting where it's just in passing, maybe at an intake appointment, maybe it's our first meeting together where we're trying to determine what programming you're going into. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of informal stuff, but some of the barriers that our homeless population faces, it's things that you might not even really think about. I mean, when you're homeless, what's probably the one thing you don't really have is a stable address. So now, when you don't have a stable address, how do you follow up on insurance? And if you can't follow up on insurance, you can't follow up on your mental health. So it kind of snowballs into those things. Or they may not have access to a regular phone to where they can regularly call or have someone call them with a follow-up appointment. So it's those things. The little stuff becomes huge barriers for our homeless population.
So how can we serve the homeless population in that and help them get to a point where counseling is an option for them?
So I think the rescue mission is really doing some really great strides in kind of reducing those barriers. One, again, the stability of having that address, of having the phone, or at least even maybe having the case manager be the point of contact to kind of fill in those gaps to make sure that the individual can get that call about their next appointment and things of that nature. So making sure all of that stuff is in place. And also the rescue mission is trying to actually bring those services into the building. So that's kind of what I'm doing via my time here at the mission right now. I'm just kind of doing some on-site therapy as needed, but also different agencies that we partner with actually have a presence here in our community resource center. So they have an on-site location because sometimes transportation can be a barrier.
Yeah.
So we're at the rescue mission. I love how we're just kind of bringing down those walls.
So let's broaden that question now. Instead of just the homeless population, people as a whole, people listening to this that maybe aren't homeless, they're just at home listening. What can they do to expand their mental health awareness, as well as if they need to or have considered going and getting help? What would you say to encourage them to take that step?
I think as a whole, we need to talk about it more. We definitely need to normalize the conversation surrounding how we're feeling and understand that we've been blessed with a wide range of emotions, and Jesus went through all of those emotions and displayed them very openly, and that we can live by that example. It's okay to, be depressed. It's okay to have anxiety about a situation, but we need to definitely make it more normal for us to talk about it around our dinner table at home with our families, especially if you have kids, just checking in with them. Like, I have a 18-year-old daughter who's, a young adult, doing all the young adult stuff.
Just graduated high school?
Yes. And then I have a 14-year-old who went through, 13-year-old. Not yet there, but yeah. So she went through like a health crisis a couple years ago. And we are always checking in with each other. Like, hey, how are you doing? Like, do you ever feel this way or that way? I think at my home it's a little easier because of my background, But there's so many great prompts and resources out there that anyone can utilize to bring the conversation home.
Do you have examples of those prompts or websites?
Well, there is the Mental Health Society, that you can definitely Google there, and they will give you some great information about how to talk about depression. In fact, sometimes I just pull out my phone and Google, like, how do I talk about depression? Or how do I talk about anxiety with my child? And things of that nature, because the words that they may use may look different than what we will say. Like my daughter, I didn't realize she was going through anxiety regarding her health until I realized, like, that's where the tummy ache is coming from. So even your young child who may be 4 or 5 going to school, and then you realize, like, hey, after a week, they've been telling me every day they have this tummy ache. It's actually them trying to express they have anxiety. So yeah, and also your one big help in that was even just our physician, just kind of helping to decode, like, what does those things mean? And physicians are, really kind of stepping into increasing more your mental health wellness along with your physical health wellness.
Yeah, because they all affect each other, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, and there are a lot of people who don't go to the doctor unless they're like dying. Right. Likewise, there's a lot of people who will never see a counselor unless they're in some sort of crisis. There's no sense of what maintenance looks like. And you had mentioned before we went on air about the idea of, like, what you can do personally to sort of be paying attention. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that I try to get all of my clients to, and even at home with my family and myself included, is that I try to have regular check-ins with myself. Journaling is a really great way to do that. Just kind of taking inventory of what emotions am I feeling right now? What am I going through day to day? Because with mental health, the best thing you could do for yourself is stay ahead of it. It's not about waiting until you're in complete crisis, like you mentioned, Matt, but having those resources and tools in place to help you through a crisis is what's important. So you definitely, waiting until a crisis, that's fine if that's, and I'm grateful that you've come to receive mental health at this point before things got worse, but there's so much that we can do before that to equip you to weather the storm in a better way. And so there's so many tools now online that are available just to utilize, just to do wellness checks. There's apps. One that I utilize a lot is Abide, and it is a faith-based app. They use scripture and just calming sounds, and it's really great to meditate to, and they tell really awesome stories and things of that nature. And the narrators, you get to kind of figure out whose voice do you like the most to listen to. And yeah, I mean, there's so many tools out there.
Can we talk just for a hot second about the idea of what meditation, right? That I know there may be a lot of people hear that and they
now we're getting into the hippie stuff here, Matt.
You weirdo. This is supposed to be
hippie.
This is supposed to be Christians talking here.
Yeah.
Right. We don't do that sort of stuff. But truth be told, we've been doing that stuff since day one.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, definitely, when we think about our time with God and just being still and, just kind of quietly listening for the voice of God, in many ways, that's meditation. I mean, you are, taking time to just slow yourself down enough to really just connect, not only just with God, but also yourself, which is really the biggest piece, is learning to connect with yourself. A lot of times we're moving so fast in the world that we don't have time to recognize that, oh, I am going through something. One thing I teach a lot of my clients is to do body scans. For example, I had one guy every day, at the end of the day, his jaw is sore. I said, think about those different areas in your body that are sore at the end of the day. And then try to think back to, what was your day like? And he's like, oh, well, I was going through X, Y, Z. He named off like 3 or 4 stressful situations. And it's like, when you're stressed, do you clench your jaw? And he's like, I do. I was like, yeah. So now he's in the position where he can realize, I'm clenching my jaw, I'm stressed, and he can get ahead of it. So
On the point of getting ahead of it, or even maintenance, is what Matt mentioned earlier. What are some signs of maybe you're depressed, or you're feeling anxious, or you said a stomach ache for kids? What are some tall tale signs? We're talking about all these broad topics, but what's something that if a parent was listening to this right now and they went home, they could see it in their kid because they were thinking, man, my kid's acting different. What's going on?
Yeah, and one thing is like the media kind of portrays different mental health disorders in like the most extreme light. So they paint depression as just like all of a sudden this, walking around in dark clothes. And
Black
like
cloud.
Yes.
I wear black on the outside because black is how I feel on the inside.
Exactly.
If anybody gets that reference,
Dashboard
you
confessional.
can find me at Pastor Matt at the Rescue. Never.
So, yeah, I mean, it can be subtle sometimes when someone is going through depression. In fact, one thing that I catch some of the staff here even doing is I've realized there's an increase in dark humor.
And interesting.
And I'm like, wait a minute, like, you're telling those jokes a little too often. Like,
and with a little too much gusto.
Exactly. So then you just start looking at that, like your kids, especially teenagers, a level of sarcasm that just kind of seems abnormal or just kind of displaced. You may notice that they're more withdrawn, or the things that they used to care about doing, you notice they're just not doing those things anymore. Sleep, even though we sometimes, may think like, oh, well, they're going through a growth spurt, just really paying attention to those things. And that's really the biggest piece. It's just kind of really open conversation. We can't be afraid to ask the question like, hey, are you feeling this kind of way? And it's so important to open up those doors of communication early before crisis strikes.
Would it be fair to say like this is one of those things that like if you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated? Right. So if you're going, oh, I might be depressed, you're probably already most of the way there.
Yeah.
That's a way to uplift someone that's depressed. Oh, you're already depressed.
Well, no, but I mean, I guess one of the things that I'm hoping we do, with hearing from Wanda is that we normalize this so that it is part of the conversation, so that it is not a once a year, thing where we talk to our friends or our kids and be like, are you all right? And they're like, and you're like, okay, good. I'm glad we talked.
Merry Christmas, by the way.
Run out the door.
Yeah, and definitely in recent years, I've had to take on more of a leadership role at the rescue mission, and I've had to really kind of watch my team for burnout because we do a lot of work here at the mission, and sometimes it just really feels like there's just not enough hands, on the deck to kind of help out with the crisis. And so when burnout starts to kick in, it's a very short trip from there to depression. And so making sure that, your team is cared for, those that you're working with, and checking in with them. Again, I will, like monthly, we have a group where we all get together, have a carry in, have food, and then like, okay, now how can I love on you guys? And things of that nature. So it's so important.
It's interesting you mentioned burnout and then mental health within the workplace, because actually our last podcast, one that we had with Dirk Rowley, we talked about that and how in the 90s and even early 2000s, that wouldn't even been a topic that a business would care about. They'd be like, fine, leave. Like, we'll just find someone else to replace you. Or now it's becoming more of a norm and becoming almost an expectation from employees that their employer allows them to have some sort of mental health coaching or help. What do you think that's done for the business world and just society as a whole, bringing that into the workplace?
Yeah, it's a change that I'm really glad to see. Like when I was stationed in Italy, I was so envious of like my Italian counterparts because rest was just a common theme. Like, yeah, we need a 3-hour lunch break. We need a nap. Or like just telling your employers like, hey, I'm feeling stressed right now. I'm going to take the next month off. And
so if HR is listening, we could.
Well, that is a good transition point. Matt and I both worked in emergency services here at the rescue mission, and it is incredibly difficult. Basically, say it that simply, working directly with those that are facing a homeless crisis, that are facing mental health issues, like it can be really taxing in some seasons, especially winter when our numbers increase. What are some ways that
Three times the number of people we've been serving?
Three times the number of people we've been serving, and opening up a women's emergency shelter, and that bringing in a whole different group of people than what you're used to. How do you care for these people and at the same time care for yourself and prevent burnout? You know, how do you stop yourself from getting to that point where you're fried and you don't want to help anymore?
Yeah, I definitely will like to give kudos to the rescue mission on one area where I really feel like they've done a really good job of making sure that employees know that we want you to take care of you, which is so important. I think for so many individuals out there, they're afraid to like, hey, I can't pause to take care of me because my employer will let me go and move on to the next person. And that's a real fear and concern that individuals have. But then when I talk to some individuals, I kind of remind them, like, if you don't pause to take care of your mental health, even on some level, on a small level, routinely, you're going to find yourself in a bigger situation where you're having to take more time off than what you even planned on, which is the same with your physical health. If you ignore your cholesterol long enough, hey, you might need to get that stent later on.
It's all a fake number. What do you mean?
Don't eat that big, giant fried chicken sandwich.
7 cheeseburgers is good for me.
I have more stuff. It might be for another podcast, but some of the things that I think are really interesting that, you know, little trails that we could go down are this. I always think of poor mental health very much in relation to like being by yourself, and it always seems like that exacerbates everything.
Isolation,
right? Like when I'm alone, my anxiety goes up, my depression goes up, my, you know, whatever it might be. So I don't know. Comment on this, right? What would it look like for mental health be takes a village type of mentality versus like one person has to figure out how to get help by themselves or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like your term there, takes a village, because currently with the residential care staff team at the rescue mission, which, Matt, I guess now it's time to tell you I'm going to send you a calendar invite for a meeting. But
I will accept that calendar invite. Thank you.
But one thing that we're doing is I, of course, can't be there for every single one of them at all times. So we're creating a prayer chain just within our team of like, hey, you're going to meet a point person for the next week or so. And you're going to, you know, we're going to be able to send you our prayer request. You're going to pray for the team and do the check-ins during that period. And then you'll get to pass the baton. Because, of course, caring for someone and caring for others, you can get burnt out. So it's a load that we all have to share. And so it's a really great way that we're loving on each other. And I'm able to, I spend time kind of equipping the team a lot, giving them tools and resources that they can use amongst themselves. Because you're right, it does take a village. And just because I might have the skills and know-how, you may not be comfortable coming to me. So it's really important that you have someone out there and that there's multiple people in the village who are on the same team trying to.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about, you know, we could serve 1 million meals. We could house, you know, hundreds and thousands of people. We can do all of that sort of stuff. But if we don't do something to connect them, right, then they're just going to be in the same position they were in when they came in. And one of the things that I know we always used to try to encourage is like, when you come in here as a, you know, I want to believe that our mission statement is for not just our participants, but our employees and anybody who walks in here, that you are transformed from something to something, right? And that it's not just like you got in here, you got, you know, dry socks, you got whatever, and then, and now you're fine. Instead, we want to give you a link or several links to something, points of attachment, where when and if you fall again, it won't be as far and it won't be as long and it won't be
as hard.
Yeah. And that, I think that makes it better for everybody, right? Because a lot of us, you know, we really want to help, but we don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
right? So we always talk about, if you want to do something, give us a call at the rescue mission. Come down, see what we do, take a tour, get on our website, and you can actually, you might not be a counselor on staff, but you can be a part of the mental health of this place. You could be a part of the mental health of our city, and we can participate together to make a lot of things better, I think.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So I think this may be my favorite podcast episode we've recorded
by far.
So we should make this a regular deal, Wanda, when we have you on the podcast. That's what I'm thinking. I'm a big Frasier fan. So he hosts a radio show and gives people advice. But I have just loved this episode and would love to do more in the future.
Wednesdays with Wanda.
A Wanda Wednesday.
On Thursday, though. Because this is,
So Wanda, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I mean, you blew my mind in the first 2 minutes of the episode, and I just had to keep up for the rest of it. But thank you for coming on the podcast today.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Rescue Mission podcast, we ask you to consider leaving a review, subscribing, following whatever platform you're on. We'd love to have you keep up with us and what's going on with the Rescue Mission podcast. Thanks for listening.